Egypt in the time of the pharaohs, a rich and powerful empire. But the people of Israel live in slavery, oppressed by a tyrannical pharaoh. To win their freedom, Moses sends 10 plagues on Pharaoh's land. As God's fury, they sweep over Egypt. The plagues bring desolation, disease, and death. At least according to the Bible. Are they just legends? Or did these events really happen? The first 6 plagues had struck Egypt. In the Old Testament, one place name indicates a possible location for these events.
Ramses, they call it. They certainly meant P-Ramses.
An ecological disaster destroyed this city. Archaeologists now know the cause. The arm of the Nile that guaranteed its survival dried up.
And for that reason, P-Ramses had to be abandoned.
When the river ran dry, there were serious consequences. It could have triggered an ecological chain reaction.
One explanation for the Nile turning red is the accumulation of burgundy blood algae.
What the first 6 plagues describe, red water, fish deaths, plagues of frogs and insects, and illnesses, could all have occurred in the downfall of P-Ramses. But 500 years before, something far worse happened. The greatest natural disaster the ancient world had ever known, the eruption of Santorini. It caused climate collapse over the whole region. For the peoples of the entire Mediterranean, the world must have descended into chaos. Plagues 7, 8, and 9 tell of hail, locusts, and darkness. Can these be explained scientifically via the eruption of Santorini? In Jerusalem's temple schools, the account of the 10 plagues is being compiled. As the story continues, Moses summons the next plague. And Moses stretched forth his rod toward heaven, and the Lord sent thunder and hail, and the fire ran along upon the ground. Pharaoh was powerless in the face of God's plagues, but the Bible says he hardened his heart, and he would not let the people of Israel go. And with the 7th plague, the hailstones crashed down upon Egypt. But how are massive hailstorms caused? And what could link them with a volcano? At the National Center of Atmospheric Research in Colorado, they're on the track of powerful natural forces. Hailstones from throughout the world have found their way to their deep-frozen archive. Evidence of bad weather on a biblical scale.
This hailstone fell in Coffeyville, Kansas in 1972. And it weighs about 700 grams. And a hailstone this size falls about 40 meters per second. When a hailstorm of this kind occurs, they can kill quite a few people out in the open fields. There was a storm in Bangladesh in 1986 that killed almost 100 people in this way.
The size of a hailstone and its destructive force cannot be predicted. In hailstorms, normality gives way to danger and destructive power. Mere humans are helpless. The events at Coffeyville have been immortalized as the hailstorm of the century.
Keep your eyes shut! Put on your head.
In the Bible, it says that Egypt endured the worst hailstorms in its history. The harvest was destroyed. Man and beast struck down in the fields. The authors of the Bible set these events long before their own time. Could their stories be based on folk memories of natural disasters passed down through the generations?
Wenn man die 10 Plagen der biblischen Exodus,
If you reduce the 10 plagues of the biblical Exodus to their basic elements, you find natural disasters in the form of darkness and hail.
in Form von Finsternis und Hagelsturm, eine insgesamt.
This story is fictional when taken as a whole, but it certainly refers to experience, to historical experience.
Der erste Kandidat ist der
The first candidate is the eruption of Thera. This eruption of the volcano of Thera of Santorini must have triggered a global climate disaster.
Eine globale Klimakatastrophe ausgelöst haben.
In the Mediterranean Sea north of Crete is the island group of Santorini, with Thera at its center. About 3,500 years ago, it was the site of the greatest natural disaster of the ancient world. No one could have recognized the warning signs. The last eruption lay 15,000 years in the past.
It must have hit the peoples around the Mediterranean extremely hard. An island and a people well known in the region suddenly and completely disappeared. Nothing was left on Santorini.
The great eruption announced itself slowly at first. As the Black Mountain, the volcano, came to life, foul-smelling sulfurous vapors emerged and spread. The first tremors shook the island. Boiling fountains of steam burst from the sea. Sea quakes caused giant waves to build. These are the heralds of the coming disaster, a few months ahead. A Minoan wall painting from the island. Is this a portrayal of the events before the eruption? It shows a giant wave. On Santorini today, Professor Walter Friedrich and his team are studying the site of the disaster. Together with botanists, physicists, and archaeologists, he has reconstructed its different stages. For the island's inhabitants, it became a race against time. After the first tremors, it's clear they tried to save what they could.
The first sign was that the houses in Akrotiri were destroyed. Walls tumbled down, roofs fell in. The people were terrified. They were afraid something worse was coming. They gathered up food supplies. They even piled their beds up, ready to take them away. And they collected all their valuables. But then there came another sign.
Abandoned food jars, a staircase destroyed by the earthquake. The excavation at Akrotiri shows the houses were almost completely emptied before the eruption. The beds, tied together ready to go, had to be left behind. The population ran out of time. The mountain belched hot volcanic ash. For the Minoan islanders, it was time to leave. Experts believe the population got off the island in time, no traces of valuables or human remains have ever been found. But no one knows where they sailed to take refuge. "700 kilometers southeast of Santorini lies Egypt, the location of the biblical plagues. Is there any trace of the disaster here? At Avaris in the Nile Delta, archaeologist Manfred Bitak has been excavating different ages and layers of Egyptian history for more than 40 years. One of his greatest finds was the discovery of Minoan frescoes in a palace complex of the 18th dynasty, long after the time of the disaster.
Have a look at this. This is a bull jumper. The quality of the painting is fantastic. There's the bull's tail, here's its coat, and here's the bull jumper.
A computer reconstruction shows pictures of another world. They must have been painted by Minoan artists living and working in Avaris generations after their island had been destroyed. The paintings themselves give no hint of the way Minoan civilization must have been shaken to its very foundations.
I think it was a kind of new beginning. Minoan artists decorating a palace with Minoan paintings. And it's interesting that at the same time the influence of Minoan art on Egyptian art becomes noticeable. That's further evidence that at that time there was close contact between the Minoan world and the Egyptian world.
Zu einem besonderen Kontakt zwischen der minoischen Welt und der ägyptischen Welt gekommen ist.
The excavation's store holds another unusual find from the palace complex. About 140 pumice stones, porous chunks of cooled lava. Are they, perhaps, from the eruption of Santorini? We know that after months of warnings, the island burst open in a series of gigantic explosions.
Das war eine der größten, vielleicht die größte Explosion.
It was one of the biggest, perhaps the biggest explosion ever recorded. It must have been a colossal bang. We can only compare it with Krakatoa in 1883, where the sound of the explosion could be heard in Australia, 5,000 kilometers away. And the shock wave was recorded in Potsdam, in Europe.
Bei Berlin gemessen.
Before collapsing into itself, the volcano expelled 20 billion cubic meters of molten lava. The Atomic Institute in Vienna. Geoscientist and chemist Max Bichler is an international expert in the study of pumice stone. He establishes the origins of unidentified pieces of pumice via the unique chemical fingerprint left by every volcano. We ask him to examine the pumice from Avaris. There are no volcanoes in Egypt, so where does the pumice in Avaris come from? Is it from Santorini? The sample for analysis is prepared from a tiny amount of powdered pumice. The individual chemical makeup of the stone will provide information about its origins. To get it, the stone is bombarded with neutrons in the Institute's reactor. This turns the chemical elements in the pumice into radioactive isotopes. Then, a gamma spectrometer will measure their concentration. This defines the chemical makeup of the stone. Max Bichler analyzes the data on his computer. Based on the resulting profile, the sample can be precisely attributed to one particular volcano. For Bichler, there is no doubt about its source.
Dieser Bimstein aus
This sample of pumice from Avaris can be quite clearly assigned to the Minoan eruption via its chemical fingerprint. And that is true of the majority of pumice samples that we have so far received from this location.
But the pumice found in Avaris doesn't necessarily prove that the Santorini eruption had a catastrophic effect on Egypt. Pumice was a valuable commodity in ancient times. We know pumice from Santorini floated ashore in the Mediterranean. It was gathered up by local people and taken to the towns, where it was adapted for many different purposes in the workshops. It would be ground to a fine powder and then used for sharpening or polishing. Scribes also used the powder to smooth out their papyri. After the Great Eruption, the sea rose up, and giant waves, tsunamis, destroyed entire coastal settlements throughout the Mediterranean region.
Es gab mehrere Tsunamis.
There were several tsunamis. There must have been several as a result of the earthquake, and then more in the different phases of the eruption. And probably the greatest tsunami came when the roof of the magma chamber collapsed.
Today we know that tsunamis must have reached a height of 30 meters. The pumice could have been carried far inland by the waves. But it was the ash from the volcano that would have led to climate collapse, lightning and hailstorms. The seventh biblical plague. But how is hail caused? Dust and ashes in the atmosphere cause a temperature drop. But by itself, cold isn't enough. In this experiment, snow crystals are injected into drops of water at -20 degrees. A hailstone is suddenly formed. At the Institute for Atmospheric Physics in Mainz, Nadine von Blom is searching for other elements around which a hailstone can form. Hail needs solid particles in the air, like dust, in order to grow. By adjusting the wind speed and temperature in the atmosphere chamber, Nadine can mimic the conditions of a storm at an altitude of 2,000 meters. Silver iodide particles are injected into the air. A hailstone appears as though out of nowhere. The longer it dances in the currents of the wind tunnel, the bigger it gets. Hailstones occur when rain clouds collide with a mass of icy air. At that moment, the humidity will attach itself to any foreign body. Aerosols, grains of sand, or ash particles are classic binders of hail. Even this giant hailstone from Kansas is the result of a collision with tiny ice and dust particles. Before it impacted on the ground, it passed through many layers of colder and warmer air, growing to a terrifying size. This cross-section under polarized light shows its stages of growth. The eruption of Santorini released millions of tons of ash. Hail could easily have followed. And the Lord thundered in the heavens. He gave his voice, hailstones and fire. He looks on the earth and it trembles. He touches the hills and they smoke. Volcanic eruptions appear again and again in the Old Testament as a metaphor for God's power. Molecular biologist Dr. Ciro Trevisanato was investigating ancient papyri for evidence of the biblical plagues. At first, he was skeptical about a direct connection between the volcano at Santorini and the plagues of Egypt as described in the Bible. Geographically, the two events seemed much too far apart.
The idea that the biblical plagues were related to the Santorini eruption is not new. And I myself didn't really believe in it. In fact, I was wondering, the volcano is roughly 800 kilometers away from the Nile Delta. How is it possible that the volcano can have an effect so far away?
But now, Ciro Trevisanato believes he has found a remarkable connection between the biblical plagues and the Santorini volcano in an ancient Egyptian papyrus, one that even suggests the Santorini eruption could have caused all the plagues. For him, the hailstones are only one consequence of the volcanic eruption. He believes he has found the key in a medical papyrus that describes ancient illnesses and their treatment.
There is a correlation between the Santorini eruption and what is described in the medical papyrus called the London Medical Papyrus. Paragraph 55 describes some burns that were caused by acids. The only source for such a burn would have come from a volcanic source. The best part, though, in this specific paragraph is that we have associated with the burns a red water from the Nile.
In paragraph 55 of the London Medical Papyrus, it says that burns caused by red acidic water should be treated with alkaline mixtures. But the waters of the Nile should on no account be used to prepare this remedy. Could this be a reference to the first plague, when the Nile's waters turned red and were undrinkable?
A volcanic eruption explains all biblical plagues, and it explains them in the order provided by the biblical text.
Acid rain and acidic ash could have contaminated the Nile after the eruption. And according to this theory, it could have set in motion the entire sequence of plagues described in the Bible. In the laboratory, Ciro Trevisanato and his colleagues put his theory to the test. Volcanoes hurl tons of sulfate aerosols into the stratosphere, poisonous sulfuric acid compounds that can be carried hundreds of kilometers by the wind. Trevisanato uses the volcanic sulfates to make a series of different solutions. Their acidity levels are tested using litmus paper and recorded. Next, they need to find out how acid rain caused by volcanic eruptions can damage organic material. Plants are sprayed with sulfate solutions. The earth around them is contaminated too. don't hold out for long. After just 6 hours, the effects of the poison are visible.
Ash fallout is able to explain the plagues because the fallout would first of all have colored and acidified the Nile, killing the fish. Moreover, it would have pushed the frogs out of the Nile. Now, the flesh would have attracted insects. Moreover, the persistence of the ash that didn't fall out would have caused weather anomalies by poisoning, for example, the grass. All herbivores died. And then we have the boils. Then we get another weather anomaly, i.e. the hail. And then we get the locusts.
In the Bible, the Egyptians are helpless against the plagues. But did the historical Egyptians actually have advanced medical knowledge to cope with the effects of the eruption? In the same papyrus, there are detailed instructions for making medicines. In 6 medical texts, there's advice on how to treat corrosive wounds to the skin and eyes caused by acidic substances. And there's even a formula for a cream to treat burns caused by red water. Clay, oil, ochre, resin, beef fat, and wax must be finely ground and mixed together. That's paragraph 55 of the London Medical Papyrus. Then the doctor, also the chief magician, must appeal to the gods with magic words to help in the work of healing. In the Bible story, the Pharaoh's most senior magicians were powerless in the face of the plagues. And yet the Pharaoh refused to let the Israelites go. And the God Yahweh sent the next plague. And Moses stretched forth his rod over the land of Egypt, and the Lord brought an east wind upon the land all that day and all that night. And when it was morning, the east wind brought the locusts. They fell upon the land in their millions, and devoured all that was left behind by the hailstones. They destroyed the crops in the fields and stripped the trees of fruits and leaves.
Many consider the locusts to be the plague par excellence. And yes, we can explain it in light of the ash fallout. Why? Because the ash fallout had caused weather anomalies, which translates into higher precipitations, higher humidity, and that's exactly what fosters the presence of the locusts.
Every day, locusts consume their own weight in vegetation. They're found on every continent. Scientists at the University of Halle in Germany are researching how and why swarms of locusts develop. They breed their own locusts at the institute to find out. Hans-Jörg Ferentz's team have discovered something crucial. The creation of a swarm and the direction it takes depend above all on the weather. Locusts like to aim for wet and rainy regions.
The locusts simply make use of the fact that wind usually moves from a high-pressure area to a low-pressure area. And low pressure almost always means an area where it's raining or where it has rained. So it makes a lot of sense to move with these currents of air because you get to a place where you can lay eggs and where your offspring will probably have favorable conditions to develop. Because it has rained and plants will grow, which can then be eaten.
As they search for food, locusts migrate between the weather fronts. A swarm on the move can cover up to 40 kilometers a day. In the labs, the scientists are keen to find out how locusts can reproduce so successfully.
Locusts are real breeding machines when conditions are favorable. When they get enough to eat and when the environmental conditions are right, they can produce enormous numbers of offspring in a very short time.
Before laying its eggs, the female locust fills the egg hole with a special foamy secretion to stop it drying out. This way, the eggs can survive a long time, even in dry, powdery or sandy ground. The 70 eggs she's laid are simply waiting for the next rainfall. Then the baby locusts emerge in their masses. A locust swarm contains up to 2 billion insects. If a swarm like this descends on a farmer's fields, it will strip them bare, consuming up to 40,000 tons of vegetation in a day. The Bible says the plague of locusts destroyed all the crops of the land of the Nile, until the west wind blew them away. But then the series of disasters continued. With the 9th plague, an all-encompassing darkness covered Egypt. In the middle of the day, it became as dark as the darkest night. A terrifying phenomenon that has made humans in all eras fearful of the end of the world. A total eclipse of the sun caused terror in the ancient world, but it can be ruled out as a historical explanation of the 9th plague. In an eclipse, the phase of absolute darkness lasts only a few minutes. The Bible describes a darkness that settled on the land for 3 days. Sandstorms that extinguish all daylight can lead to long periods of darkness over wide areas. In China, they're known as yellow dragons. Year after year, they transform Beijing into an impenetrable chaos. But volcanoes are the cause of the blackest darkness. And the biblical darkness could find its explanation in the ash fallout from the Santorini eruption. The evidence to link the Santorini disaster with the Bible plagues is very tempting. The search for more answers about the effect of Santorini on Egypt takes us to Charu and the dig led by archaeologist Abdel Maqsoud. For years now, he's been researching the eastern frontier posts of the ancient Egyptian empire. As he uncovered the foundations of fortifications, he discovered unexpected signs of a great volcanic eruption in the Bronze Age.
When I started excavation here, I cannot expect that I will find something. Put the site of Charu in contact, in direct contact with the volcano of Santorini.
But then he found pumice stones, just like in nearby Avaris. Unlike the scientists there, Maqsoud believes that the effects of the eruption hit Egypt unexpectedly hard.
When we discovered lava of this volcano here, and they discovered in Avaris, we understand that Egypt affected from the volcano of Santorini. The water of the Mediterranean arrives through the Pelusiac branch, which it passes here in this area, and through the Pelusiac branch until Avaris. The waves of the sea, about 20 meters, it was very high, and the only part very low this area and the branch of the Nile, we will understand that the effect covered a very big area and very archaeological sites.
When the volcano collapsed in on itself, the mass of displaced water built up into tsunamis, traveling at speeds of hundreds of kilometers an hour. By racing up the arms of the Nile, they would have caused untold damage. The eruption of Santorini has been dated to somewhere between 1550 and 1500 BC. But where are the records of the event in the Egyptian chronicles? In Egyptian records, these are boom times. From the mid-16th century BC, the boundaries of the Egyptian empire are extended as never before. In a series of military campaigns, the pharaohs of the 18th dynasty conquered all of Asia Minor. In the temple of Karnak, the triumphs of the victorious pharaohs are carved in stone. With pictures of the crushing of their enemies, the pharaohs celebrate their own glory and their power. There is no sign of any effects of the Santorini eruption in the illustrations of this period. The caldera of Santorini today. For years now, doubts have been growing among scientists about the exact date of the eruption. The critical evidence is buried here under layers of lava. Geologists have discovered an olive branch covered by lava 3,000 years ago. This branch, preserved in volcanic rock, is a sensational find. This is organic material, so it can be carbon dated. The moment the olive branch died will be the exact date of the volcanic eruption. After dating a previous find, Walter Friedrich is convinced that the once accepted date for the eruption will have to be pushed back 100 years. If that result is confirmed with this branch, the new timing will be unchallengeable. This lava wall shows what must have happened in the eruption. The brown earth is the original level of the landscape. This is where the olive trees stood that perished in the inferno, before the storm of hot ash stripped the leaves off the trees, and before the lava flows that followed buried them under 60 meters of pumice.
There was a root here at this spot. I say was because the root is no longer there. We only have the dust of the root, but we have the holes. And then we see that this white layer starts quite abruptly. It's about 4 centimeters thick here, quite clear. That's volcanic dust, pumice dust. And here at this point, we see olive leaves in this layer. And here and there, we find the remains of twigs and olive stones. And so we are quite sure that there were olive trees growing here.
To put it, yes.
The first olive branch that was measured split the scientific world. some experts doubted the new dating of 1613 BC. It was based on just one sample, with no chance to make a comparative test. The new find is taken from a different tree. Will this branch confirm the new dating?
Yes.
A sheet of tinfoil protects the wood as it's sawn through to gather test samples. None of the valuable material must be lost. At Germany's Hohenheim University, they keep samples from trees thousands of years old. This wooden archive contains unlimited data from past ages, stored in the memory of the trees. Paleobotanist Michael Friedrich is an expert in dendrochronological dating. He will prepare the sample from Santorini for carbon-14 testing. The surface is made smooth and marked for microscopic analysis to enable the identification and counting of the annual rings. Michael Friedrich must look for places where the outside ring just beneath the bark is still present. Only then will a precise dating be possible. And there it is. At carefully measured intervals between the outside ring and the center of the tree, he prepares the samples for carbon-14 analysis. The prepared samples arrive at Heidelberg University's Institute for Radiometric Age Assessment. Now the final preparations for carbon dating can go ahead. The wood is broken into smaller sections and cleaned. Then it's enclosed in an airtight quartz file. All organic elements are now burnt off to reduce the test sample to pure carbon. The first Santorini olive branch was dated by radiation physicist Bernd Kromer. This is his chance to carry out a comparative test on the second branch.
Via radiocarbon dating, we can identify the time when the tree was alive, because it absorbed carbon out of the atmosphere. The tree could have died a long time before the eruption and remained standing in the landscape as a dead tree. In that case, carbon-14 testing would still establish the date of the tree's death, but not the date of the eruption. But we can rule out that situation because beneath the tree we found leaves, and that shows that the tree was alive at the time of the eruption.
The measurement of the radioactive carbon-14 content takes place in the mass spectrometer. The result is 95% accurate. This complex procedure takes 3 weeks. Finally, the age of the branch is indicated on this calibrated graph.
We measured 2 separate samples of the second olive branch, as we did of the first, and these measurements confirm that the volcanic eruption took place in the 17th century BC and not the 16th century.
The 2 finds from Santorini tally perfectly. They confirm a new date for the eruption. Santorini exploded sometime between 1620 and 1600 BC. 3,630 years ago, the olive branch was covered by lava. The now confirmed date of its death will have huge consequences for future research and for our understanding of ancient history. Armed with the new date, we can return to the excavation at Charu in the Egyptian Sinai to see whether historical events did leave their mark in the wake of this great disaster, to see how it could have affected the social and political climate of the times. The remains of these fortifications tell of Egypt's darkest period. They were used by the Hyksos, foreign rulers from Asia Minor, who seized power in Egypt's northern empire. The empire of the pharaohs was split in two. For the first time, part of Egypt was under foreign control. The years that followed were times of economic decline and serious unrest. The era of the Hyksos kings long remained a trauma in the Egyptian imagination. Did the after effects of this great natural volcanic catastrophe lead to a time of struggle and chaos? And did it also trigger the plagues the Bible tells us about? The fury of the gods was the only possible explanation in those days for this terrifying rampage of natural forces. The first 9 plagues tell us about contaminated rivers, fish deaths, plagues of frogs and vicious insects, about epidemics of disease, hailstorms and plagues of locusts, followed by a deep darkness. Were the Hebrew scholars recording folk memories passed down through the generations? Everywhere in history, encounters with inexplicable events have a profound cultural impact. Disasters and their consequences remain alive, immortalized in stories and fables.
The God of the Hebrew Bible had to be able to control natural forces, or he would have been of no interest to the believers. Only a God who can cause earthquakes and epidemics and starvation and droughts is also a God who can protect his people from such phenomena. That is a basic thought that lasted far into the Christian period, that it was far worse for pre-modern man to have no God at all than to have a God who was sometimes evil, cruel, angry, or unpleasant.
In the biblical duel between Moses and the Pharaoh, the plague of darkness is a mortal challenge to the greatest of the Egyptian deities. The sun god Ra, who guarantees the rhythm of day and night and the continuation of life, is proved powerless. But even after the 9th plague, Pharaoh does not let the Israelites go. And the Lord said unto Moses, "Yet I will bring 1 plague more upon the Pharaoh and upon Egypt. Afterwards he will let you go hence." With the 10th plague, all the firstborn of the land of Egypt will die.